The knock came early, sharp, and too familiar. When I opened the door, my daughter-in-law Melissa was standing there with folded arms and a face that could cut glass. "You have 3 days to pack up and get out," she said, her voice calm, almost rehearsed. I remember staring at her thinking she must be joking. This was my house. I'd built the porch she was standing on. I'd planted the oak tree shading the driveway. My wife and I raised our only son here. But in that moment, none of it seemed to matter. Something in her eyes told me this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan. Behind her car, the neighborhood looked exactly as it always did. Quiet, polite, pretending not to watch. The world hadn't changed, but mine just had. I wanted to ask why, but grief makes you slow. And I was still carrying the weight of my wife's funeral 6 months ago. Maybe that's why I didn't see the trap until it snapped shut. What Melissa didn't know, though, was that I wasn't the confused old man she thought I was. I'd spent 30 years with the FBI following money trails most people couldn't even imagine. And this time, the trail led straight to my own front door. After Helen passed, the house turned into a museum of silence. Every mug, every photo frame, even the smell of her favorite lavender soap. Everything whispered her name. I'd been married to that woman for 43 years. Watching her fade away from pancreatic cancer felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, watching the ground give out beneath you inch by inch. Our son Michael flew in for the funeral. He brought his wife Melissa. They'd been married 3 years, but truth be told, I barely knew her. She was always on her phone, dressed like every meeting was an audition, always talking about real estate and market opportunities. That should have been my first clue. On the 3rd day after the funeral, while I was washing Helen's favorite coffee mug, the blue one with the chipped handle she refused to throw away, Melissa appeared beside me. She said softly, almost sweetly, "Edward, you can't stay in this big house all alone. It's not healthy." Her words sounded like concern, but they felt like an opening move. I told her I was managing fine, but she didn't seem convinced. She started picking up unopened envelopes from the counter. "You've got a lot of bills here," she said. I remember wondering how she even noticed that. At the time, I didn't see the pattern forming. Grief makes you blind in ways you don't realize. When someone offers help during your darkest hour, you don't question their intentions. You just nod and say thank you because you don't have the strength for anything else. Melissa offered to help sort through the mail. "Just to make sure nothing important gets lost," she said, taking the stack into the dining room. It sounded harmless, even thoughtful, so I agreed. That night I passed by Helen's old office and saw Melissa snapping photos of documents, bank statements, life insurance forms, investment papers. When I asked what she was doing, she smiled and said she was keeping things organized. She was right about one thing: I did have quite a bit to organize. What I didn't know yet was that she was keeping track for herself. Over the next few weeks, her visits became routine. She'd show up with casseroles, help with the garden, and bring up conversations about long-term planning. She'd say things like, "Edward, have you ever thought about simplifying things? A smaller place, maybe, somewhere safe and easy to manage." At first I thought she meant well, but then came the little comments that felt like needles. "You told me that same story yesterday," she'd laugh. "Maybe we should write these things down." Or, "Are you sure you paid that bill? You've been forgetting things lately." Each remark chipped away at me. It's strange how manipulation doesn't come as a storm, it comes as drizzle. You barely feel it until you're soaked. Then she started mentioning senior living communities. She even brought brochures once. "They're beautiful, Edward. 3 meals a day, medical staff on site, no stairs to worry about. Much safer than living alone." The word alone hit me hard. She knew exactly where to press. I often found her in Helen's office again, rummaging through drawers. She always had an excuse. "Just making sure your papers are in one place," she'd say. But what really got under my skin was how she talked about Michael. Always vague. "He's dealing with some financial issues," or "he doesn't want to bother you while you're grieving." Every time I asked to speak to him directly, there was always a reason I couldn't. Too busy, too stressed, or traveling. Months passed like that. I started getting strange mail credit card statements. I hadn't opened calls from financial advisors I'd never met. Melissa always had a calm explanation, one that sounded logical at first glance. Looking back, it's terrifying how easy it is to hand over control when you're drowning in loss. When someone keeps saying, "I'll take care of it," you start believing them because you want to. And that's exactly how I became her project. She wasn't helping me out of kindness, she was positioning herself. What I didn't realize yet was that this wasn't just manipulation. It was the start of something calculated, precise, and dangerous. Later, when I pieced everything together, I would understand that every helpful gesture was a move in a bigger game, one designed to end with me signing away everything I had. But at that moment, all I saw was a daughter-in-law trying to help a grieving old man stay afloat. And I thanked her for it. It started so quietly that I didn't notice it happening. That's how manipulation works. It doesn't arrive with thunder. It slides into your life wearing concern like a disguise. Melissa began planting little seeds in my mind. She'd tilt her head just slightly when I forgot a name or misplaced my glasses. "It happens to all of us," she'd say, but her tone carried the faintest hint of pity. At first I brushed it off. I was 68, not senile. Everyone forgets things. But the more she said it, the more it started to sound true. She'd stop mid-conversation, smile softly, and add, "You told me that story yesterday." Or she'd laugh gently and say, "Maybe we should start writing these things down." Each comment was small, harmless on its own, but together they built a narrative that I was losing control. That's the thing about gaslighting. It doesn't force you to believe something overnight. It wears you down until doubt feels like logic. And Melissa was very good at it. Soon she was suggesting that I let her handle just the finances. "You shouldn't stress about paperwork," she said one afternoon while flipping through my mail without asking. "You've got enough on your mind. I'll just make sure everything's in order." I wanted to believe she was helping. After Helen died, the weight of daily life had felt unbearable. Bills, insurance, estate, paperwork. It all blurred together. When someone steps in and says, "Let me take care of it," it feels like relief. But relief can be dangerous when it's built on blind trust. Melissa started dropping pamphlets about senior living communities on my kitchen counter. "Look at these, Edward. They're beautiful. 3 meals a day, medical staff on site, even art classes. You'd never have to worry about cooking or stairs again." I laughed it off at first, but she wasn't joking. She kept saying I needed a safer environment, that it wasn't healthy to live alone. What she really meant was that it wasn't convenient for her plans. Then came the real move. She showed up one morning with a fresh stack of documents and 2 cups of coffee, acting like it was just another helpful visit. "I had my attorney draw this up," she said casually. "It's a power of attorney form. Just in case something happens, I can handle things for you and Michael." Power of attorney. 3 simple words that in the wrong hands can destroy an entire life. She said it was for the family's benefit, so bills wouldn't pile up or accounts freeze if I had a health emergency. It all sounded reasonable until I read the fine print. The document didn't just let her help with basic tasks. It gave her complete control over every asset I owned. my accounts, my house, even my investments. I asked her why my son's name wasn't on it. She smiled and said, "Michael's too busy, you know how work is. I'm the practical one." That's when I saw it, the flicker in her eyes. A mix of confidence and calculation. I didn't sign. I told her I needed time to think. She hid her disappointment behind a sympathetic smile and said, "Of course. But Edward, at your age, decisions only get harder the longer you wait." That line stayed with me for days. It was phrased like advice, but carried the weight of a warning. She kept pushing. Every time she visited, she brought it up again. "You don't want to burden Michael, do you?" she'd say. "This way you can relax knowing someone responsible is handling things." Responsible. I used to think that word meant trustworthy. Now I know it can also mean manipulative, rehearsed, and patient. Her tone began to shift. There was less warmth, more control. She started treating me like I was a problem to manage, not a person to care for. She'd remind me how forgetful I'd been, how easily I got confused, how much easier my life would be if I just signed. What I didn't realize then was that she wasn't just trying to take over my finances, she was trying to rewrite my identity. The more I doubted myself, the easier it would be for her to take everything. Looking back, I can see how expertly she worked. She never yelled, never made open threats. Instead, she used patience as a weapon. She built trust, created dependency, then slowly made me question my own memory. That's how exploitation often begins. Not with force, but with familiarity. It starts with someone who calls you family, tells you they care, and then convinces you to let go one small piece of control at a time. For anyone who's ever been in my shoes, remember this: help is a beautiful thing when it's offered with honesty. But when it comes wrapped in guilt and urgency, it's not help. It's a hook. And I was already caught on the line. That night I couldn't sleep. Every word Melissa had said kept replaying in my head like a scratched record. The talk about safety, the pamphlets, the way she insisted that I wasn't thinking clearly, it all started to sound less like concern and more like conditioning. So around midnight, I poured myself a cup of coffee, turned on the desk lamp in Helen's old office, and pulled out every document I could find. Tax returns, bank statements, insurance papers, investment portfolios. 3 decades of a life built through quiet discipline and shared dreams. It took hours. By dawn, the entire desk was covered in paper. That's when I saw it, small, sticky notes in handwriting that wasn't mine. Account numbers, balances, notes about insurance policies, even contact details for my financial advisor, written in Melissa's neat looping script. She'd been cataloging my life, every account, every dollar, every safety net. I felt a cold, hollow anger settle in my chest. It wasn't just about the money, it was about what it represented. Every page was a chapter of my life with Helen. Every figure, every line, every investment had been something we planned together. And now, those same numbers had become a map for someone else's greed. I realized I'd made the same mistake that so many grieving people do. I'd confused proximity with trust. When someone steps into your home during your weakest moments, offering to help you let them in, not realizing you've opened the vault to everything you value. As I looked across the room, the morning light was starting to seep through the curtains. The walls still held the framed photos of our family trips. Helen smiling by the lake Michael, as a kid, holding a fishing rod too big for his hands. It felt surreal to know that the woman married to that little boy had been quietly plotting to erase me. I went through the numbers carefully. Retirement accounts, roughly $2.3 million, a savings account with $45,000, the house recently appraised at $890,000, Helen's untouched life insurance payout, $250,000. Added up, and the total was just shy of $4 million. 4 million reasons for Melissa to pretend she cared. That kind of money changes people, even the ones you think you know. And when you add grief and isolation into the mix, it becomes the perfect storm for exploitation. I sat there for a long time thinking about how Helen used to handle our finances. She was organized, thoughtful, precise. I was the one who earned the money, but she was the one who made sure it grew. After she passed, I hadn't touched any of it. I couldn't. It felt like disturbing something sacred. Melissa must have known that. She saw hesitation as an opportunity. She wasn't just trying to manage my affairs. She was positioning herself to inherit them while I was still alive. That morning she showed up again right on schedule, 2 coffees in hand, a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She set 1 cup down in front of me and slid another version of the power of attorney form across the table. "I had my lawyer look over it," she said. "He made a few changes to better protect you." I scanned it slowly. The changes gave her even broader power authority to sell my property, access my safe deposit boxes, make investment decisions, even withdraw from accounts without notice. It wasn't protection. It was control. I looked up and said, "I'll need more time." Her smile faltered for just a second. "Of course," she said, "but Edward, you're not getting any younger. The longer you wait, the more complicated things get. Michael's already struggling financially. He could really use the help right now." There it was again, the mention of Michael's supposed financial trouble. A convenient story I'd never heard from my own son. "How much does he need?" I asked. "It's not about an amount," she said. "It's about being ready to help family when they need it." Translation: she wanted the keys to everything. As soon as she left, I sat in silence, the paper still on the table, the coffee untouched. I could feel the weight of what was happening pressing down on me. This wasn't paranoia. It was proof. That's the thing about fraud. It never looks like fraud at first. It looks like kindness, like help, like someone being responsible when you're too tired to be. But once you pull back the curtain, you realize the danger isn't in what they're asking, it's in how gently they ask for it. That morning, for the first time since Helen's death, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: clarity. Melissa thought she was dealing with a lonely old widower desperate for help. What she didn't know was that she'd just handed a former FBI financial investigator every piece of evidence he needed to take her down. And this time I wasn't going to let emotion cloud my judgment. Not again. The next morning I found Melissa already waiting in the kitchen, 2 cups of coffee on the counter, and a fresh version of the power of attorney document spread neatly across the table. Her voice was light, cheerful, like we were about to discuss a vacation plan instead of my entire financial life. "I had my lawyer make a few small adjustments," she said, her smile carefully measured. "This version will make sure you're completely protected." I sat down and began reading line by line. The adjustments were anything but small. This new draft didn't just grant her the ability to pay my bills or access my accounts. It gave her full authority to sell my house, withdraw funds, manage my investments, even open new lines of credit under my name. It was the kind of document people sign when they're unconscious, not alive and sitting across the table. I looked up and asked Melissa, "Why does this give you access to everything I own?" Her expression didn't change, but her tone softened in that practiced, condescending way she'd perfected. Edward, it's standard legal language. My attorney said this will save you a lot of trouble later. You shouldn't have to worry about all these details. That was her favorite word, shouldn't. You shouldn't handle this yourself. You shouldn't stress about paperwork. You shouldn't question people who are trying to help. Every shouldn't was a brick in the wall she was building between me and my own independence. I pushed the papers back across the table. I'm not signing this, I said. For the first time, her smile slipped. Her jaw tightened just slightly before she caught herself. Of course, she said, pretending to stay calm. If you need more time, I understand. But Edward, you're not exactly getting younger. It's better to take care of these things before it's too late. Too late. That phrase hung in the air like a threat wrapped in concern. I didn't respond. I wanted to see how far she would push. That's when she leaned forward, lowering her voice. I'm only trying to make sure you're protected, but if you keep refusing help, the court might decide you're no longer capable of managing your affairs. That can happen, Edward. I've seen it before. There it was, the mask cracking. Her voice was still calm, but her words carried a quiet menace. She was no longer the helpful daughter-in-law. She was warning me that she could make me legally disappear if I didn't cooperate. I stared at her for a long moment. Are you saying you'd take me to court? I asked. She hesitated, then gave a little shrug. I'm saying the state has procedures. It's not about me, it's about making sure your finances are handled responsibly. You'd still have a say. Just not complete control. Not complete control. That was her goal all along. I didn't argue. I simply said, I'll think about it. Then I smiled the same polite, distant smile she used on me. She seemed relieved and quickly changed the subject, pretending nothing had happened. But that was the exact moment I decided to stop underestimating her. When she left, I sat in silence for a while, listening to the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. The house felt different now, not empty, but alert, as if it understood what was happening. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the recorder app. From that day forward, I started documenting everything, every conversation, every visit, every kind gesture. If she was going to play a long game, so was I. People often think manipulation is loud and obvious, but it rarely is. It hides behind politeness, behind phrases like "for your own good." It uses your grief as a tool and your silence as permission. Melissa had crossed a line that day. The moment she hinted that I might be declared incompetent, she stopped being family in my eyes. She became an adversary and one I planned to expose. That night I called an old friend from my FBI days, Detective Jack Nolan. We'd worked together on more fraud cases than I could count. Jack, I said when he picked up, I think someone's trying to run a con on me. He didn't hesitate. Tell me everything. And for the first time since Helen died, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, control. Because if Melissa thought she could gaslight an old man into handing over $4 million, she was about to learn that this old man used to teach criminals how not to get caught. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of documents Melissa had left behind. The house was silent, except for the steady tick of the clock. I'd spent years chasing financial criminals, but I never thought one would come wearing my family's last name. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old contacts until I found the name I hadn't called in years, Jack Nolan. Back in the day, he'd been one of the sharpest detectives in the bureau. Quiet, methodical, the kind of man who didn't just see the crime, but the pattern behind it. When he answered, his voice was still the same, steady, slightly weary, but dependable. Jack. It's Edward Harris, I said. There was a pause, then a softer tone. Jesus, Ed. I heard about Helen. I'm sorry. How are you holding up? I took a breath. That's actually why I'm calling. I think someone's trying to pull a con on me. I laid out everything. The power of attorney, the subtle manipulation, the comments about my memory, the way Melissa had isolated me from my son. I could almost hear Jack's pen scratching as he took notes. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. Ed, this is classic elder financial abuse, he said. Sophisticated kind. Emotional manipulation. Isolation. Urgency. All the signs are there. She's setting up legal control before she makes her move. Hearing him say it out loud hit differently. I'd been suspecting it, but part of me still didn't want to believe that the woman my son married could be capable of something like this. Jack's tone turned professional. You need to start documenting everything. Every conversation, every document she gives you, every excuse she makes. No matter how small, and for God's sake, don't sign a single thing without me looking at it first. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Understood. Good, he said. We'll treat this like a case. You've dealt with worse. Just keep your cool and let her think you're still in the dark. I hung up and felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief because I finally had someone on my side who knew what to do. Dread because I realized how close I'd come to losing everything. That night I set up a small notebook on my desk, the kind Helen used to keep her recipes in. But instead of ingredients, I wrote dates, times, and summaries of every interaction with Melissa. The first entry read June 5th. Melissa arrived 9:00 a.m., brought coffee, presented new POA draft, attempted to convince me to sign, used Michael's name again to add emotional pressure. Left 10:15. It felt strange at first documenting my own life like a case file, but as the pages filled up, it gave me something I hadn't felt in months' control. The next day, Jack connected me with a private investigator named Tom Turner, a former Secret Service agent who specialized in financial crimes. Tom was tall, serious, and spoke like a man who didn't waste words. He listened as I retold the story, then nodded once. Your daughter-in-law's good, he said. Too good. This isn't her first time. She's playing the long game, build trust, create dependence, then isolate. I've seen it before. We went over a plan. I would keep recording every conversation using a small device. Jack sent me, a sleek, discreet thing that looked like a key fob. Every time Melissa came over, I'd keep it running. Tom would run background checks on her real estate clients, financial history, and any connections to other potential victims. Meanwhile, Jack would coordinate with the Denver Police Financial Crimes Unit to build a case quietly, without tipping her off. As they spoke, I found myself thinking about how easily this could have gone the other way. If I hadn't caught that handwriting on my financial documents, Melissa could have already transferred half my assets without anyone noticing. That's what makes elder financial abuse so terrifying. It doesn't look like theft. It looks like love. It looks like someone saying, I'm here for you when everyone else has gone home. But once you realize the truth, there's no going back. From that day on, I stopped being the victim in Melissa's story. I became the narrator of my own. Every smile she gave me, every cup of coffee she brought, every gentle suggestion she made, I treated it like evidence. It's a strange thing pretending not to know you're being hunted. But sometimes the only way to catch a predator is to let them think the trap is still open. And Melissa Carter was walking straight into hers. A week passed before Melissa made her next move. She came by late one evening, the kind of hour polite people don't visit unless it's urgent. Her eyes were red, her voice trembling just enough to sound believable. Edward, I need to talk to you. It's about Michael, she said, setting her purse down with a dramatic sigh. I felt my stomach tighten. Michael's name was her favorite weapon, one she used whenever she needed to twist the knife. She sat at the table, wringing her hands like a woman burdened with unbearable news. It's serious, she continued. Michael's in trouble, the kind you can't fix with good intentions. I kept my face neutral. What kind of trouble? She hesitated, pretending to choose her words. Money trouble. He owes people, serious people, dangerous ones. They want their money tonight. It was the kind of story meant to bypass reason and go straight for panic. How much? I asked. Her voice dropped to a whisper. $50,000. 50,000. She didn't flinch when she said it, as if she'd practiced the number. They said if we don't pay, something bad will happen, she added, her voice cracking at the edges. I can handle the transfer, but I need access to your account, just for tonight. It was all I could do, not to laugh. She was good, too good. The shaky voice, the tear in the corner of her eye, the way she framed it as we instead of you. It was classic emotional leverage, fear wrapped in urgency. I'll need to see documentation, I said calmly. Loan statements, bank records, anything that proves what you're saying. There's no time for paperwork. She snapped, her mask slipping for just a second before she caught herself. These people don't work with contracts. Of course they didn't. In her story, the villains were conveniently invisible. Melissa. I said I'm not transferring money to anyone without understanding what it's for. Her tone hardened. Edward, do you want something terrible to happen to your son? That was her checkmate move, or so she thought. What she didn't know was that every word of this performance was being recorded. The small key fob sitting between my coffee mug and the table leg had been running since she walked in. I leaned back and sighed. You said it needs to happen tonight. She nodded, quickly sensing victory. Yes, right now. If we act fast, we can stop it before it's too late. All right, I said slowly. Give me a minute to get my checkbook. Her shoulders relaxed. She looked like a snake that had just swallowed its meal. But instead of walking to my desk, I walked to the living room and picked up my phone. From where I stood, I could still hear her voice in the kitchen rehearsing concern. We're doing the right thing, Edward. Michael will thank you for this one day. I dialed Jack Nolan. Jack, I whispered. She's here. She's making her move. Says Michael owes money to dangerous people and needs $50,000 tonight. On the other end of the line, I heard Jack's steady voice. Keep her talking. Don't hand over a cent. We're recording everything. All ready, I said. I walked back into the kitchen, calm and slow like a man on a Sunday stroll. Melissa, remind me, who exactly are these people? She froze. You don't need to know that. I do if I'm sending $50,000 to them. Her eyes darted, searching for a way to recover. Edward, please. They'll hurt him. It was impressive, really, the layers of manipulation, the mixture of fear, guilt, and urgency. Most people would have cracked under that kind of pressure. But I'd seen this play out 100 times before in other cases with other faces. The same formula, just a different actor. She leaned forward, lowering her voice again. I know this is hard for you. You're scared. But trust me. I'm doing this to protect our family. I met her gaze. Are you? That moment lasted longer than it should have. Her confidence faltered just enough to show the truth beneath the performance. Then she looked away, pretending to wipe a tear. Edward, she said softly, if something happens to Michael, you'll never forgive yourself. She was right about one thing: I wouldn't forgive myself. but not for the reason she thought. I wouldn't forgive myself if I let her get away with this. When she left that night frustrated that I hadn't transferred the money, she didn't notice the small device still blinking on the table. Every lie she told was stored inside it. Jack called me 20 minutes later. "Ed, that's solid evidence. She just tried to commit wire fraud. Keep her talking, keep collecting." And that's exactly what I did. The thing about people like Melissa is that they believe their victims are too old, too tired, or too trusting to fight back. They mistake patience for weakness. But what they never understand is that time works both ways. While she thought she was tightening her grip, I was already building the case that would destroy hers. By the time this was over, Melissa Carter would learn what real consequences looked like. And she'd realize the one thing con artists always forget: sometimes the quietest man in the room is the one watching you set your own trap. A few days after the $50,000 emergency, Jack called me early in the morning. His tone was calm, but I could tell he'd found something big. "Ed, you might want to sit down for this," he said. Those words never lead anywhere good. But what came next wasn't bad news. It was revelation. Jack and Tom, the investigator, had traced several of Melissa's recent calls and banking activities. None of them matched her story about dangerous people or loan collectors. What they did find, however, was a small trail of digital breadcrumbs that led somewhere entirely unexpected: Nassau, the Bahamas. Tom met me at a cafe downtown later that afternoon. He brought his laptop and that same look of quiet confidence investigators get when the puzzle pieces finally start fitting together. He opened a file and spun the screen toward me. There on the monitor was a photograph my son Michael sitting on a beach chair in Nassau. He looked relaxed, suntanned, very much alive. Next to him was a young woman with blonde hair wearing sunglasses and laughing at something he'd said. "This was taken 2 days ago," Tom said. "Metadata confirms it. Same face, same birthmark. He's not in Miami, Ed. He's been in the Bahamas for 6 weeks. I stared at the screen, not sure whether to feel relief or rage. Relief that my son wasn't dead. Rage that his wife had been using his name as a prop in her little theater of lies. "Who's the woman?" I asked. "Her name's Jessica Moore," Tom said. 26, from Phoenix. No criminal record, no red flags. According to her social media, she met Michael about 3 months ago. He told her he was single and going through a divorce. I rubbed my temples, letting that sink in. Melissa wasn't just manipulating me. She was building a full-blown production. A husband presumed dead. A grieving widow collecting sympathy and donations. A father being guilt-tripped into financial ruin. And the star of her tragedy, still sipping cocktails under Caribbean sunlight. Tom leaned back and said, "She's good, Ed. This isn't her first con. She's orchestrating the setup fake death inheritance estate control. Once the paperwork's done, she'll liquidate everything." I nodded slowly, piecing it together. "So while she's here crying about Michael's debts, he's on vacation pretending he's single." Exactly. And the scary part is, she might not even know he's alive. That thought hit like a thunderclap. If Melissa truly believed Michael was gone or planned for him to be gone, that meant I wasn't dealing with just a scammer. I was dealing with someone who was rewriting reality itself for profit. That evening I sat in my living room staring at the framed photo of Helen and Michael from years ago. My son was smiling in that picture, proud and uncomplicated, the kind of man who believed love made people better. Somewhere along the way he'd lost that clarity and married someone who weaponized compassion for money. I thought about all the warning signs I'd ignored. The secrecy, the sudden financial issues, the emotional distance. We all like to think we'd notice when someone we love starts living a double life, but lies don't show up in one big reveal. They arrive drip by drip, disguised as excuses. By nightfall, I'd called Jack again. "She's building something bigger, Jack," I said. "She's not after a transfer or a check. She's trying to erase my son." He agreed. "Ed, from what we're seeing, she's setting the stage for a fake death, maybe even a full inheritance claim. Once she convinces you and the community that Michael's gone, she gains legal control of everything tied to his name." I sat back, stunned by the simplicity of it. All she needed was a forged death certificate, a grieving act, and my signature on a few estate documents. People wouldn't question it. They'd bring casseroles and condolences instead. Fraud doesn't always wear a ski mask. Sometimes it wears mascara and crocodile tears. Before we ended the call, Jack said something that stayed with me. "She's getting desperate. When people like her feel cornered, they double down. Be ready." And he was right. Because a few days later, Melissa showed up at my door in a black dress, eyes red from crying, holding what she claimed was the worst news a father could hear. That was the day my son died. 3 nights after Tom showed me the photos from Nassau, my phone rang just as I was getting ready for bed. The number wasn't familiar, but something in my gut told me to pick it up. "Dad." It was Michael's voice, steady, alive, real. For a second I couldn't speak. All the anger and confusion I'd buried these past weeks came rushing to the surface. "Michael, where are you?" I finally asked. "I'm in Nassau," he said. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks, but Melissa told me you were sick, something about memory problems. She said you didn't want to be disturbed." I felt my blood run cold. "She told you that?" "Yes. She said you'd been having episodes that the doctors were worried. I've been calling and texting, but she kept saying you needed rest." "What's going on?" For the next hour I told him everything. How Melissa had started hovering around after his mother passed. How she'd helped organize my finances, pushed for power of attorney, and then staged a crisis about his supposed debts. How she'd tried to rush me into transferring $50,000. When I finished, there was nothing but silence on the other end. Then he said quietly, "Dad, I don't owe anyone a cent. I never asked Melissa to handle anything for me, and I definitely didn't ask her to talk to you about money." It was like the final piece of a long, ugly puzzle snapping into place. "Michael, I said she's planning something much bigger. She's told people here that you're in trouble. I think she's setting up a fake death, your death, to get access to my accounts." He swore under his breath. "I knew things were bad between us, but I didn't think she was capable of that." "Where are you right now?" I asked again, just to ground myself in the absurdity of it. "At the Atlantis Resort," he said. "I'm here with someone. Her name's Jessica. We've been seeing each other for a few months. She doesn't even know I'm married. I told her Melissa and I were separated." That was the moment I realized how deep the deception ran. Melissa had built her con on isolation, cutting both of us off from each other so she could control the story. To her, I was a senile old man. To him, I was too fragile to handle stress. And in between those two versions of reality, she was quietly rewriting our lives for profit. I took a deep breath. "Listen, son. We're going to fix this, but we have to be careful. She can't know you're alive. Not yet." Michael hesitated. "You mean let her keep pretending I'm dead?" "For now," I said. "If we interrupt the act too soon, she'll destroy the evidence or run. Let her think she's winning. Let her dig the hole herself." He was quiet again, then finally said, "All right. You've always been better at playing the long game, Dad. I'll stay put. Just tell me what you need." After we hung up, I sat there for a while in the dark, phone still in my hand. The relief of knowing my son was alive mixed with the weight of what had to come next. Melissa wasn't just greedy, she was dangerous. She'd weaponized grief, community trust, and the illusion of compassion. And now she was about to walk into her own trap, one she'd built brick by brick, unaware that both her victims were already awake. That night, I called Jack Nolan and told him everything. He didn't sound surprised, only focused. "This changes the whole game," he said. "If we let her keep going, we can catch her in the act. We'll be ready when she tries to make it official." So that became the plan. Michael would stay in Nassau unreachable and presumed dead. I'd keep pretending to be the grieving father, compliant and confused exactly the way she wanted me. Jack and Tom would monitor everything from the background calls, documents, bank activity, even the whispers going around our neighborhood. We weren't just gathering evidence anymore. We were building a stage for the truth to collapse right on top of her. And soon enough, Melissa Carter would learn what happens when you write a fake obituary for a man who's still breathing. 3 days after Michael's call, Melissa showed up at my door, dressed in black. Her hair was pinned back, her eyes rimmed red, and she carried a stack of papers clutched dramatically against her chest. "Edward," she said in a trembling voice, I have terrible news." She lowered herself into the same rocking chair where my wife Helen used to sit every evening to read. For a moment she even mimicked Helen's habit of smoothing the armrest with her palm, as if she were rehearsing empathy. "There's been an accident," she continued, letting the words hang in the air long enough for the silence to do most of the work. "Michael's gone." I set my coffee cup down slowly. "Gone." Her eyes darted up just long enough to confirm that the performance was landing. "A car crash in Miami," she said. "He didn't survive. I've been handling the arrangements." Then she unfolded the paper she'd brought, a death certificate with Michael's name printed neatly across the top. Official seal, stamped date, everything in order. Except for one problem, my son was alive and tan, sitting in the Bahamas with a woman named Jessica. I looked at the paper carefully. "Cremation?" I asked, pretending to study the details. "Yes," she said softly. "That's what he wanted, just like his mother." But that was the mistake that cracked her script. Michael was terrified of fire, always had been. He wouldn't have asked for cremation if his life depended on it. "I see," I said, feigning numbness. "That's a lot to take in." Melissa nodded, pressing a tissue to her cheek, careful not to smudge her mascara. Then she pulled out another document, another version of the power of attorney, now rewritten as an emergency estate authorization. "Edward," she began, "we need to act quickly. Michael had debts, serious ones. His creditors could go after your accounts, your house, everything. If you sign this, I can move funds into protected accounts before anyone files claims." Outside, I saw neighbors watering their lawns, pausing to glance toward my driveway. Melissa's car was parked right out front. I could already see the whispers forming. By the end of that afternoon, her lie had spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson from next door brought over a casserole. The Johnsons stopped by with flowers. Everyone wanted to comfort the poor widower who'd lost his only son. Melissa played her role beautifully. She hugged people tightly, spoke in hushed tones, and told them I was barely holding on. She even said Michael's last wish was that I take care of Edward. I nearly laughed out loud, but she didn't stop there. That evening she launched a GoFundMe campaign titled "Help a Grieving Father Heal." The page was masterfully written. It painted me as a broken old man drowning in medical bills and funeral costs. It claimed Melissa was managing everything out of love and duty. Within 6 hours, neighbors, church members, and even my former co-workers had donated nearly $8,000. Some left comments like, "You're a saint, Melissa, and stay strong for Edward." Watching her collect sympathy from people who meant well made my stomach turn. It's a cruel kind of theft when someone steals not just money, but compassion. I kept quiet. I had to. Jack and Tom were monitoring everything from the background, watching the donations roll in, tracing where the funds went. Every post, every transaction, every fake tear was another piece of evidence. Melissa was in complete control of her audience, now directing her own tragedy. She organized a memorial at St. Mark's Church, booked flowers, and arranged for a full reception afterward. She'd even written an obituary, Jack told me later, his voice half disbelief, half admiration, for the sheer boldness of it. It read, "Michael Harris, beloved son and husband, passed away unexpectedly on August 15th in Miami, Florida. His kindness and laughter will be deeply missed by all who knew him." It ran in the Denver Post and online. Friends from high school were sharing it on Facebook. People were calling, crying, offering condolences. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. And through it all, I sat quietly in my living room, watching her dig her own grave with every word she spoke. She thought she'd written the perfect ending to her con: a dead husband, a grieving father, a sympathetic community, and access to $4 million. But what she didn't realize was that the story wasn't hers to finish. This time the plot twist belonged to me. The morning of the funeral felt almost unreal. The sky was clear, the air still the kind of quiet that usually settles before a storm. St. Mark's Church stood at the end of the street, sunlight glinting off its stained glass windows. Inside, hundreds of people filled the pews, neighbors, friends, old colleagues, all gathered to mourn a man who wasn't dead. Melissa had outdone herself. The place was draped in white lilies, and soft organ music played in the background. She moved gracefully between guests, accepting condolences with the delicate poise of a woman who'd been practicing for this very moment. Every tear seemed perfectly timed, every sigh perfectly measured. When she spotted me near the entrance, she placed a hand over her heart. "Edward, you made it," she said softly, as though I were the fragile one. "Michael would be so proud of you." I nodded, pretending to play my part, the grieving father, broken but obedient. I took my seat in the second row and glanced toward the pulpit. A large framed photo of Michael stood beside the casket. He was smiling in it, tanned and carefree. The irony almost made me laugh. Then I saw them, Detective Jack Nolan and Tom Turner, entering quietly through the side door. Both wore dark suits, but their presence changed the air in the room, the kind of presence that signals something is about to happen. At 10:30 sharp, Melissa walked to the front, a stack of note cards in hand. Her voice echoed through the church as she began the eulogy. "Michael was the kind of man who put family first," she said, pausing for effect. "Even after his mother passed, he always worried about his father. He would want us to care for Edward during this painful time." Her words were honeyed poison. Around me, people sniffled and dabbed their eyes. I could almost hear the sound of hearts breaking for her performance. That's when Jack made his move. He walked calmly down the center aisle, his badge glinting under the church lights. The organ music faltered. Melissa froze mid-sentence. "Mrs. Carter." Jack said, his voice steady, carrying easily through the hall. "I'm Detective Jack Nolan with the Denver Financial Crimes Division. I need a moment of your time." A hush fell over the crowd. Melissa blinked rapidly, trying to hold on to her composure. "I... I'm in the middle of a funeral," she said. "Yes," Jack replied, taking a few steps closer. "For Michael Harris, according to this death certificate." He held up a document for the congregation to see. "The problem is, Mrs. Carter, your husband, isn't dead." The entire church gasped. Before anyone could speak, Jack connected his phone to the church's sound system. The speakers crackled, and then clear as day came Michael's voice. "Can you hear me?" The projection screen flickered to life. There he was, Michael very much alive, sitting on a balcony in Nassau. Palm trees waved in the background, sunlight pouring over his face. "Hi, everyone," he said, smiling awkwardly. "I just wanted to clear up a little misunderstanding. Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated." The silence broke into chaos. Some people screamed, others stood up in disbelief. Phones were out everywhere, recording, calling, sharing. Melissa's face drained of color. She stumbled backward, clutching the pulpit for balance. Jack continued calmly, his voice cutting through the noise. "Mrs. Carter, you are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and elder financial abuse." The words hit her like a physical blow. She shook her head, muttering excuses. "This is a mistake. He's confused. He's not well." But her denial was drowned out by the crowd. Michael leaned closer to the camera, now speaking directly to her. "Melissa, stop. I'm not confused. I'm alive, and you've been lying to everyone." A young woman appeared beside him. "Jessica." She looked into the camera, shocked. "Wait, wife," she said, turning to Michael. "You told me you were divorced." Even through the live feed, you could see the realization hit him. The betrayal in both directions was complete. Tom stepped forward with a folder of evidence recordings, forged documents, GoFundMe transactions. "We have everything," he announced to the congregation. "Recordings of threats, falsified paperwork, proof of theft from over 100 community members." This wasn't a tragedy. It was a scam. The church erupted again, this time with anger. People shouted from the pews. Mrs. Patterson yelled, "I gave you money." "Melissa, you said he died in your arms." Another voice cried out, "You played us all." Melissa tried to run, but Tom blocked her path. Jack read her rights as the crowd filmed the entire scene. She trembled no longer, the grieving widow, just a con artist caught under the same roof where she'd faked her husband's death. Jack finished with quiet finality. "The show's over, Mrs. Carter." As they led her away, the congregation watched in stunned silence. The photo of Michael still stood beside the casket, a monument to the lie that had just collapsed. I stayed seated as people whispered and pointed, but I wasn't thinking about her anymore. I was thinking about Helen, about Michael, about the fine line between grief and gullibility that people like Melissa exploit. The truth is, manipulation doesn't end with money. It ends when the lie runs out of audience. And in that church, with a live broadcast from the Bahamas and the sound of handcuffs snapping shut, the audience had finally stopped believing. The air inside St. Mark's Church had shifted from grief to chaos. The organ had gone silent. The flowers wilted under the harsh light, and the woman who once commanded the room with her tears now stood frozen at the center of her own undoing. Detective Nolan gave a small nod to Tom Turner, who stepped forward carrying a thick folder. He placed it on the pulpit, the same place where Melissa had just preached about family and faith. When he opened it, the sound of paper against wood cut through the murmurs like a blade. "Mrs. Carter," Tom said evenly, "we're done with the lies." The projector flickered again, this time showing not a beach or palm trees, but audio waveforms across the screen. Then came Melissa's own voice, sharp and cold. "You're just a confused old man who doesn't know what's best for him." The recording played echoing through the church. "People like you end up in state care with court-appointed guardians controlling your money." Gasps filled the room. Some people looked horrified, others angry. Mrs. Patterson, who had donated to the GoFundMe, covered her mouth. Tom continued pulling out more documents one after another, each more damning than the last. "We have copies of the forged power of attorney, the fake death certificate, and evidence of attempted wire transfers from Mr. Harris's account to an offshore bank in the Cayman Islands." He paused and let that sink in. The bank's fraud detection system stopped the transfer 24 hours before this so-called funeral. Jack stepped up beside him. "And that's not all," he said, turning to the audience. "Melissa Carter isn't new to this. We've identified multiple elderly victims in the Denver area who were manipulated, defrauded, or coerced in nearly identical ways. Same tactics, same signatures, same woman." In the front pew, a voice spoke up shakily. "She stole my mother's house," said an older woman standing with tears in her eyes. "Told her it was to simplify the estate. She lost everything." Another man followed. "My uncle, too. He signed documents she said were for tax purposes. She drained his savings." Each confession added weight to the room. Melissa's eyes darted around like a trapped animal searching for an exit that didn't exist. Jack opened the final folder: bank statements, GoFundMe records, fake insurance claims. The theft from community donations alone totals $15,847, he said. 127 people, all victims of a woman pretending to help. Phones were raised everywhere now. Dozens of churchgoers were recording, streaming live. The footage would spread across the internet within hours. Melissa's carefully crafted persona, the grieving widow, the loyal daughter-in-law, was gone. Jack's voice softened, but it carried the weight of finality. "Melissa Carter, you are under arrest for fraud, forgery, elder exploitation, and theft by deception." As he finished reading her rights, Tom stepped forward with the handcuffs. The metallic click echoed off the high ceilings, reverberating through the sanctuary. Melissa tried to speak, her voice cracking under the pressure. "You don't understand. I was protecting him." He was losing his mind, but the crowd erupted before she could finish. "You lied to us," someone shouted. "You made us grieve for a man who's alive. I gave you money." "I didn't have," cried another. It was no longer just a police matter, it had become a public reckoning. Every face in that room was a witness, every camera an amplifier of truth. Jack raised his hand for silence and turned to address the crowd. "What you've seen today is what financial manipulation looks like when it wears the mask of family. It's subtle, patient, and cruel. But the moment we stop questioning what we're told, people like this win." He turned back to Melissa. "You built this scam on trust, and you destroyed that trust yourself." As officers led her down the aisle, the crowd parted like water. Nobody looked away. Some recorded. Others simply stared in disbelief. A few clapped quietly, not out of joy, but relief. Outside, squad cars waited in the sunlight. Melissa blinked as she stepped through the church doors, the flashing lights reflecting in her eyes. For a woman who had once thrived on attention, this was a spotlight she couldn't escape. Tom leaned toward Jack as they watched her being placed in the cruiser. "You think she saw this coming?" Jack shook his head. "People like her never do. They always think the performance will last forever." Back inside, I sat in the same pew where I'd been pretending to mourn my son. The crowd was slowly dispersing, whispering, processing what they'd just witnessed. I felt exhausted, not just from the months of manipulation, but from realizing how close I'd come to losing everything. When I looked up, the framed photo of Michael still stood beside the casket. Only now, it didn't represent loss. It represented survival, the proof that truth, no matter how buried, always finds its way back to the surface. As the last of the churchgoers left, Jack walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Ed," he said quietly. But it wasn't just over. It was the beginning of something else, an awakening, not just for me, but for every person in that room who'd learned how easily trust can be weaponized. Melissa's downfall wasn't just justice. It was a warning carved into memory. Evil doesn't always come with a threat. Sometimes it comes with a casserole and a smile. The aftermath of the church confrontation unfolded faster than anyone expected. Within 24 hours, Melissa Carter's smiling face was plastered across every local news channel. The same woman who had once been praised as a devoted wife and community caregiver was now being called something very different, a predator. By the time detectives finished processing evidence, the list of charges filled nearly 2 pages. Fraud, forgery, elder exploitation, identity theft, theft by deception. Each charge represented a moment of manipulation, a conversation, a forged signature, a stolen piece of trust. When they led her into the courthouse in handcuffs, the cameras were waiting. Reporters shouted questions as she was escorted through the doors. She kept her chin up, still trying to perform, but the mask was gone. Her lawyer stayed close, whispering into her ear, but nothing could hide the reality that her empire of lies had finally collapsed. The Denver District Attorney's Office wasted no time. In their press briefing, they called it one of the most sophisticated cases of financial elder abuse in state history. They highlighted how Melissa had exploited community sympathy, legal loopholes, and the vulnerabilities of grieving families for personal gain. Within days, the Colorado Real Estate Commission suspended her license indefinitely. That license had been her weapon of credibility, the thing that allowed her to walk into homes, offer help, and disguise exploitation as kindness. When the news broke, her agency issued a public statement distancing themselves, but the damage was irreversible. Calls began pouring into the hotline Jack and Tom had set up. Dozens of elderly victims and their families came forward, each with their own version of the same story. Widowed homeowners who'd been pressured to sign over power of attorney. Seniors told their accounts were at risk unless they moved their savings. Families who had lost properties through quiet sales, handled by Melissa's firm. The scope of it was staggering. Tom, the investigator, met with me a week after the arrest. He looked exhausted, but there was a sense of grim satisfaction in his tone. "Ed, this wasn't just you," he said. "We're tracking at least 6 other cases across 3 states, Arizona, Nevada, and here in Colorado. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division has already joined the investigation. It turned out Melissa had been running her scams for years, moving from state to state, targeting seniors who had recently lost spouses. Her pattern was always the same: identify emotional vulnerability, pose as the supportive family member or trusted professional, gain access to finances, and drain them piece by piece. Every time one scheme started to crumble, she relocated and reinvented herself. Until now. The federal investigation pulled everything apart: emails, real estate transfers, wire attempts, even her social media history. She'd used online donation platforms, fake business accounts, and shell companies to launder stolen funds. The GoFundMe she set up for my dead son was only the tip of the iceberg. When the FBI press release went public, it described the case as a multi-state elder financial exploitation network, a phrase that still makes my stomach twist. But it also sparked something important. People began paying attention. Banks, retirement planners, and senior advocates started holding community seminars about financial red flags. Churches began verifying every donation campaign before sharing them. Even neighbors started checking in on elderly residents who lived alone. Melissa's arrest had become a warning shot. In court, her attorney tried to paint her as misguided, claiming grief and financial stress had blurred her judgment. But the evidence spoke for itself. The recordings, the forged papers, the bank trail, all of it painted a portrait of calculation, not confusion. At the preliminary hearing, the judge denied bail, citing flight risk and extensive evidence of premeditation. Melissa stood there in her gray jumpsuit, eyes hollow, as the judge read the charges aloud. For the first time, there were no crocodile tears, no trembling voice, just silence. Watching from the gallery, I didn't feel triumph. What I felt was clarity. This wasn't just about one family's betrayal. It was about the hidden epidemic of financial abuse that feeds on loneliness, trust, and grief. People like Melissa count on victims staying quiet. They count on embarrassment, on fear of judgment, on the idea that it's just money. But it's never just money. It's security, dignity, and the right to decide your own life. Jack and I spoke after the hearing. "You realize this case is going to change how we handle elder fraud across the country," he said. I nodded. "Then it's worth every minute of the fight." By the time the federal charges were filed, the headlines had changed from "Funeral Fraud Shocks Community" to "National Crackdown on Elder Financial Abuse." The ripple effect had begun. Melissa Carter's name was now synonymous with deceit. But more importantly, her downfall had become a blueprint for prevention, proof that even the most carefully crafted lies can't survive the truth forever. The courtroom chapter closed, but the story didn't end there. After months of chaos, headlines, and hearings, life finally began to settle into something that felt almost normal again. The noise faded. The reporters stopped calling. And for the first time in what felt like years, my home was quiet for the right reasons. Michael came back to Denver. He filed for divorce immediately after Melissa's arrest, and the judge granted it faster than anyone expected. When it was done, he stood in my doorway with a suitcase and a tired smile. "Mind if I stay for a while?" he asked. I didn't answer with words. I just stepped aside and hugged him. It was the first time we'd embraced since his mother's funeral, and it carried the weight of everything we'd both survived. Over the next few weeks, we rebuilt what Melissa had tried to destroy. We really talked about the guilt, the blindness, the way both of us had let grief make us easy targets. I admitted I'd been too trusting. He admitted he'd been too absent. There was no shouting, no blame, just two men learning how to forgive themselves as much as each other. He told me about Jessica, the young woman he'd met in Nassau, the one who unknowingly became part of the whole nightmare. She came to visit that spring, nervous but kind, and Helen would have liked her. She had that same quiet strength, the same way of making a house feel like home simply by being there. Jessica and Michael eventually found a small apartment downtown, but they visited often. Sunday dinners returned the kind Helen used to orchestrate with clockwork precision. The table was full again, food, laughter, even the occasional disagreement about football or how much salt I put in the potatoes. The kind of ordinary noise that suddenly feels sacred once you've lost it. Meanwhile, the Denver Police Department invited me to speak at one of their community meetings about elder financial abuse. Jack Nolan introduced me as the man who turned a con into a cause, which made me laugh. But it was true in a way. At first I thought I'd just tell my story once, get it off my chest, and move on. But afterward, people lined up to talk. A woman shared how her mother had been manipulated by a helpful neighbor who drained her retirement account. A man in his 70s said his son-in-law had tricked him into signing over part of his property. They weren't rare stories. They were everywhere. That's when I realized what I needed to do. I began working with Jack and Tom on a public awareness campaign the city called Guardians of Trust. It focused on helping seniors recognize red flags, unsolicited financial advice, sudden requests for control, or anyone who tries to isolate them for their own good. We visited churches, senior centers, and retirement communities. We taught people how to verify documents, set account alerts, and talk openly about money with someone they trusted. The campaign grew quickly. Banks started offering free fraud consultations. Real estate firms introduced new training for agents working with elderly clients. Even the local news picked it up, calling it the Harris Initiative. But beyond the programs and policies, the real change happened quietly in the living rooms of families who finally started talking about things they'd been too polite or too ashamed to discuss. Parents told their adult children about their finances. Neighbors checked in on each other, and people began realizing that protection isn't paranoia. It's love with boundaries. Michael told me once that he'd spent months blaming himself for marrying the wrong woman. But as I told him, love doesn't make you foolish. It makes you hopeful. And hope, when betrayed, doesn't have to destroy you. It can rebuild you sharper, wiser, and stronger than before. A year later, we stood together at St. Mark's. Again, not for a funeral this time, but for something better. The church hosted a community event honoring those who helped uncover the case and establish new protections for seniors. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't read from notes. I just looked around the room, the same room where Melissa's lies had collapsed, and said, "Trust isn't something you lose once. It's something you learn to rebuild one honest person at a time." That night, when I got home, the house didn't feel haunted anymore. The ghosts of grief and guilt had finally been replaced by the sounds of living. Michael laughing with Jessica in the kitchen, the faint clatter of dishes, the hum of ordinary life returning. Sometimes justice doesn't look like revenge. It looks like peace. It looks like family coming home. What started as one woman's con eventually reshaped an entire community. The aftermath of Melissa Carter's arrest didn't just end in a courtroom, it rippled outward, forcing people, institutions, and even lawmakers to look hard at how easily trust can be weaponized. The first place to change was St. Mark's Church, the same sanctuary that had once hosted a fake funeral. Within weeks, the church council met with law enforcement to design new procedures for handling donations and memorial funds. Every campaign now required independent verification, proof of need, and dual oversight. No more anonymous GoFundMe links passed around without scrutiny. They also launched a volunteer program that checked in weekly on elderly parishioners. Simple visits, phone calls, and errands that built real community instead of assuming it existed. Next came the banks. After hearing how easily Melissa had manipulated access to my accounts, several local branches implemented new safeguards. Transactions over $10,000 by clients over 65 now required an additional verification call or in-person confirmation. Fraud departments began offering free family trust consultations, teaching seniors how to detect red flags like sudden power of attorney requests or pressure to move funds for protection. The Colorado Association of Realtors followed suit. They introduced mandatory annual training for agents who worked with elderly clients. Every real estate document involving someone over 65 now required independent witnesses. They even established a hotline where suspicious activity could be reported anonymously. The organization called it the Trust Line, and it quickly became a model for other states. But the biggest change came from the state legislature itself. In early spring, a new bill was introduced and passed unanimously. It was called the Helen Harris Protection Act, named after my late wife. The law created stronger criminal penalties for financial exploitation of seniors and required banks' lawyers and real estate agents to report suspected abuse. It also established a new division under the Department of Justice dedicated solely to elder financial crimes. When the governor signed it into law, he paused for a moment and said, "This legislation exists because one man refused to stay silent, and one woman's name will now protect thousands." I remember sitting in the back of that press conference thinking about Helen, about how she'd spent her life helping others stay organized, stay safe, stay grounded. It felt fitting that her name would become a shield for others long after she was gone. The ripple effect didn't stop there. A coalition of nonprofits, local businesses, and senior advocacy groups formed the Colorado Elder Justice Network. They created a 24-hour hotline for victims of scams and financial abuse. Volunteers were trained to guide callers toward legal help, mental health support, and recovery resources. The network even partnered with schools to create educational programs where students learned to spot manipulation not just in money, but in relationships, technology, and everyday life. One of the most moving moments came at a town hall a few months later. A woman named Dorothy stood up and shared how she'd nearly lost her house to a predatory financial advisor. But because of the new outreach program, her bank flagged the transaction and connected her to help before any money changed hands. "I didn't just get my savings back," she said, her voice trembling. "I got my confidence back." Hearing that, I realized something powerful. Justice doesn't end when the criminal is punished. Real justice happens when the pain turns into protection, when what almost broke you becomes what saves someone else. As for me, I continued volunteering with the police department's financial crimes unit. I helped design training materials for new recruits and even co-hosted seminars for community organizations. I wasn't chasing criminals anymore, but I was doing something far more lasting, arming others with knowledge. People would often ask if I ever regretted trusting Melissa. My answer never changed, no. Because trust itself wasn't the problem, it was giving it away without boundaries. That's the lesson I try to share whenever I speak. Be kind, but cautious. Be open, but observant. Ask questions even when it feels uncomfortable. Love and vigilance aren't opposites. They're partners in survival. 2 years after the law passed, I stood once more at Helen's grave. The stone was simple as she would have wanted, with her name, her birth, and death dates, and one short line beneath. She protected what mattered. The wind was soft that morning. I thought about the lives now guarded by her name, about the families spared from deception because one story found its way into the light. Sometimes healing doesn't come in silence, it comes in the noise of change. And that's the sound Helen left behind. Looking back now, I realize the story was never just about betrayal. It was about awareness. What happened to me could happen to anyone, especially those of us who still believe that kindness should be the default. Trust isn't a flaw, it's a gift, but it's a gift that needs boundaries. When I speak to community groups or senior centers today, I always end with the same 3 lessons. They aren't complicated, but they're born from scars I'll carry for the rest of my life. First, never sign anything when you're under pressure. If someone says it's urgent for your own good, or just a formality, that's your signal to stop. No legal document ever expires in an hour, and no honest person will object to you taking time to review it. When Melissa shoved those power of attorney papers in front of me, I almost gave away everything I'd worked for simply because she made hesitation feel like weakness. Don't fall for that. Second document. Everything. Record conversations when you feel uneasy. Save emails, texts, bank statements, even casual notes. Keep a paper trail, no matter how small it seems. In my case, those recordings, my own voice shaking while I played along with her lies, became the evidence that stopped her. Documentation turns confusion into clarity. It transforms your word against theirs into undeniable truth. Third, never isolate yourself. That's the oldest trick in the con artist's book. They'll convince you your family's too busy, your friends wouldn't understand, that you're a burden. They make you believe solitude is safety when it's really their camouflage. Stay connected. Call your children your church friends, your neighbors. Even a short conversation can shatter the illusion that someone else controls your reality. Those 3 rules don't sign under pressure document. Everything stay connected. Sound simple, but they're survival tools in a world where deception wears a friendly face. I sometimes think about what might have happened if I'd stayed silent, if I'd accepted her lies as truth. I might have lost my home, my freedom, even my relationship with my son. But speaking up didn't just save me, it helped expose a network of exploitation and gave others the courage to protect themselves. That's why I tell my story again and again. Not for pity, not for attention, but as a warning. Because financial abuse doesn't always look like theft. It can sound like concern, like guidance, like love twisted, just enough to control you. I once thought growing older meant slowing down. But it's taught me something deeper, that vigilance is just another kind of love. Love for your dignity, your independence, your legacy. If you're watching this or reading my words, and you recognize something familiar, maybe a relative who's suddenly managing your accounts, or a caregiver who discourages visitors, don't wait. Talk to someone. Reach out. You're not being paranoid, you're being wise. And if you've gone through something like this, share it. Tell your neighbors, your friends, your church group. The more sunlight we shine on these scams, the less room they have to grow. Melissa thought she could silence me with shame. Instead, she gave me a voice louder than her lies. So, that's my last message. Protect yourself. Protect each other. Because awareness is contagious, and so is courage.